And we should be good to go. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Mike Raftery. I'm a partner here with SCM Connections, and Connor and I are going to walk you through scenario planning in IBP, which has become a really critical component of supply chain planning lately, and even more so, a big driver for people's interest in planning solutions like IBP. So quick background, I have about 18 years of experience in supply chain planning, SAP implementations, mostly in consumer products and healthcare. I started my career working with SAP's APO solution, and most recently on the IBP side. I've been with SCM Connections about 8 years now, and been mostly responsible for a lot of the design and architecture of projects. Connor, you want to give a quick introduction yourself?
Sure, thanks, Mike. My name is Connor Cook. I'm a supply chain consultant with SCM Connections. I've been here for about a year, and I work specifically in IBP as an SNLP process expert.
Great. Yeah, so we're going to walk you through this, and like I said before, go ahead and use the chat, go ahead and use the questions, and raise your hand and all that good stuff to let us know if you have any questions along the way. So first of all, what is the state of supply chain? Why do people even need these scenarios? I pulled just a few choice articles here, and I think everybody has their own version of this, right? Whether it's I don't know what's going on. Like I said, I've been doing this 18 years, and I think just the complexity and the chaos from interconnected global supply chains has really escalated over the past probably 2 or 3 years. I think that COVID really put a focus or put stresses on people's supply chains. So wherever there might be a weakness kind of showed up in the past year or so. And that's probably a whole other podcast about that. But what the point is that these pressures are driving a lot of supply chain managers, supply chain users, directors, vice presidents into a spot where they need to invest in tools to manage it. Interconnectivity, global options, it just becomes too complex to manage what happens when the unexpected occurs, right? Whether it's a port congestion, whether it's shipping constraints, whether it's a pandemic, or it could even be something as simple as social media taking a hit to your supply chain, making the unpredictable now your problem, right? Every day is a little bit different. So of course, what that happens is change is becoming just a part of the job, right? Planners need to make informed decisions on market trends. It could be, like I said, social media. It could be the latest fad. It could be something driven by pandemic. Things like, toilet paper and like those things were easy to plan for years and years and years, and all of a sudden you get thrown upside down into the point where you're doing allocation. So with that comes scenario analysis, and that allows you to do things, as broad as things like tariffs, natural disasters, and commodity problems, all the way to issues like just, what happens if we, have a supply disruption, or what if a plant goes down, or you have labor shortages. It could be very micro or very macro, but the impact itself is significant. And so today's... Yeah, go ahead.
Me, but back on that last slide, I wanted to make a note of that bullet point about revenue impact. One of the most important things about using scenario analysis in IBP is the ability to evaluate the changes in revenue, because it takes the lens away from can we do this and brings it to should we do this. And so that's a very important element to evaluate when you're looking through these different scenarios and the best way to proceed.
Yeah, exactly. And that should, right, it gets a lot harder when you're trying to do this real time, when you're trying to do this under a deadline or under pressure, if you're doing it all offline, right? So those questions that Connor brings up become even more critical or even more difficult to manage when you're doing things like VLOOKUPs, when you're managing an Access database, you're trying to stitch together, the pivot table to end all pivot tables. All those things really kind of show where the next generation tools is needed, not just to plan a system, not just to execute, but to the point Connor mentioned, to see which of the valid options should we actually do, right? So that can be all these things: complex supply chains, disconnected data sources, ad hoc collaboration. I mean, email is great, but it's not a planning tool. So as you're emailing back and forth options 1, 2, and 3, the amount of friction and the amount of inefficiencies that come with just Excel files passing through your email server really prevents you from realizing benefits in terms of not can we do this, but should we do this? Should we be actually doing this, right? So in a modern supply chain, what really matters? And that can be things like agility. How fast can we switch to a new supplier? What's the impact if we switch to a new supplier? The flexibility goes with that as well. How, what are my options 1, 2, and 3? If you are in trouble or in a pinch where customer service is at risk, and then you start calling suppliers, that's going to be a recipe for disaster, right? You really want to have those options up in front and understand the impact of them. You're looking for collaboration. Everybody up and down your supply chain is trying to do the right thing, or for the most part. So how do you make sure that you share information quickly to manage the unpredictable and get that speed? So how do you react in a marketplace that demands instant reaction? And in the old state, and I say that lovingly, having lived through it and having implemented many of these old state solutions in my time, there's a lot of disconnected servers, whether it's different planning areas, whether it's different ERP instances, whether you have different geographies, or even just email spreadsheets where you're managing financial forecasts. That current state really creates inefficiencies, and you have spent an inordinate amount of time trying to understand what the data should be, not solving it, not figuring it out. Can we do this or should we do this? But just aligning on what is the right data, right? Is this version 13 or version 12? Well, I had version 11 yesterday. Those are the kind of conversations that really drive supply chains nuts and create a lack of trust, to be honest, in the decision-making process. So what we're going to show today is how IBP gives you all the parties get the lens that they need to view that data and to make that decision. So whether you're looking at carrier capacity, whether you're looking at raw material procurement, whether you're looking at customer service or production capacity or labor, you're able to see the impact of that plan, and it is a single plan where it might be 3 options, but everybody's looking at those 3 options in the same way. And what that really allows you to do is now collaborate and say, how we're going to do this, right? Can we do this? Should we do this? Is this the most profitable way to do it? And get everybody's input. So it's not gut feel. It's not VLOOKUPs. It's not, you're not at the risk of a typo. Everybody's looking at the same data in their own way. And that's really the power of these interconnected cloud-based systems, of which SNP or IBP is a great example. Oops. So as a decision-making tool, what really enables that? So we could get into database structure and cloud architecture in a different one, but what this really helps you do, right? What IBP really does is make sure that your customer, all the way to your supplier, is connected in a single planning area. And that in SAP speak or in IBP speak is called a unified planning area. And what that does is it enables you to show any lens of your entire end-to-end flow in integrated scenarios. So I'm going to show you 2 today. One is what happens when customer demand changes. So if on the far left side here, customer demand changes, how does that ripple all the way through the supply chain? And then I'm going to show you a different one where what happens when capacity changes at the plant, and how does that impact the customer? So being able to show that interconnectivity from start to finish, from end to end, is really where that power of an integrated planning tool comes from, and that's what provides confidence in the system. I'm going to contrast that with maybe customer demand in a demand planning system that you have to integrate to transportation, and maybe vendor purchasing is in a third system. If you're doing that, now you're doing a lot of translation manually and on the fly, and again, that leads to inefficiencies and mistrust. And that's what we're trying to build. So this is the IBP platform that we're going to look at. For those that haven't seen it, for those that have, it should look familiar. Again, all the functions that we're going to discuss sit on that same interconnected database in the middle. What this really does in practical terms is reduce what I call your decision cycles. So how fast can you make a decision based on a question? So what happens if demand goes up 20% or down 10, or what happens if we go for a third shift, or what happens if we pre-build, or what happens, all these what ifs. How fast can you answer that question? Now, like I said, I've been doing this for about 18 years, and one of my first projects was at a large consumer products company, and we rolled out a system, or a best of breed system. After rolling it out, found that to do one of these took about 2 weeks between the time I got all through all the interfaces, which inevitably led to offline spreadsheets. So, being pretty dialed in, just based on my personal experience, to see the power of reducing those decision cycles, to get a question and an answer in that same day, no matter how complex your supply chain is, really unlocks the power of that platform. And that's what we're going to walk through today. So the SNLP framework is how we're going to set the stage for our demo. Like I said, we're going to have demand and supply inputs. We're going to run them through the forecasts, more specifically today in the capacity planning process, and then understand the outputs of those in terms of service levels and fiscal impact. So again, how do you make sure these inputs filter all the way down through analytical targets is the power of a integrated system that doesn't just integrate the plan, but also the reporting in a single platform. And again, all these kind of depend on what horizon you're at. For today's purposes, we're going to be in this midterm horizon in the middle. So we're not going to be too concerned with scheduling, and we're not going to be too concerned with capital improvements, but much more in the midterm, call it your typical SNLP monthly cadence. So what are your options? So a lot of times we'll see different areas of what if planning. There's two kinds in IBP. We're going to show one of them today. The scenarios are very much for the scenario that I just described, which is you're asked a question and you're supposed to provide an answer in the same day. And so the way I kind of describe these are things that are transactional in nature. So what are some examples? Some examples would be, what if a customer increase occurs, right? What if we want to shut down weekends? What if we're going to give a holiday? What, what's the impact of adding a third shift? Our vendor called and said that they can't provide parts for 2 weeks because of a port shortage or a port logjam, right? All those sort of, hey, what happens if become those scenarios? And those are very much ad hoc user-based, and I'll show you how to create those in a few minutes. Another one that I'll talk about and answer questions about, but we're not necessarily going to show it, is the version. And the difference between scenarios and versions come from the data. Versions in IBP require new master data. So for example, what happens if we want to add a new manufacturing line? What happens if we move a plant? What if we add an entirely new product line into this manufacturing facility? Those versions are more changing the parameters of your network. The scenarios are more for changing the inputs to your framework. So if you think of your supply chain as a virtual machine, okay? Your version would be changing the components of the machine, so making it faster, slower, bigger, smaller, whatever. Scenarios would be changing the throughput of the machine. So what happens if we put more raw inputs into it, or what happens if we speed it up? That would be more of a scenario. And we're going to show scenarios today because we only have an hour, and versions require some data copy, to be very frank. But they're just as valid, and they give you both scenarios. Versions are more project-based, so think of maybe something that would last a couple weeks to a couple months. Sometimes customers do annual operating plans in a version, or a budgetary plan in a version, something like that. Scenarios are much faster, so you're talking maybe a week to 2 weeks at the most, probably less, and collaborating with your users on those problems. So that's what we're going to look at today. Let's take a look here. Next. Sorry, here. All right, next slide. So here are some examples, right? Not to pull out too much of a relevant example, but everybody's dealt with different demand curves, and So for an example of a scenario, right? This is one that came out of our COVID-19 customers, of which all of them. And this was a common one that we saw a lot of people use scenarios for. So I thought I'd bring it up. One would be, what does the recovery look like? So if you think back to, a year ago at this time when COVID first hit, we went in lockdown, nobody really knew what a recovery was. And you could argue you still kind of don't, but you modeled a few different scenarios using scenario management, to be honest. So those scenarios that you modeled, one would be, what if it's just a quick blip? What if we're right back in business, tomorrow? The next one would be, what if there's a long-term significant sort of systemic demand loss? And then what if it's somewhere in the middle? And those are easy to manage. You can do options A, B, and C and show those all along the way. Again, a real practical example, everybody has their own version of this. It could be, when would we recover? What if we have part shortages? I know there's a lot of industries facing semiconductor shortages, right? So you could model the same type of thing here, but it's basically to give you options A, B, and C in a systemic way that does side-by-side comparisons on your supply chain. And that's what we're going to look at today. So let's go ahead and get there. Cool. That wasn't too bad. All right. So nobody likes PowerPoints. It's a necessary evil of a webinar. Everybody likes demos, so let's get into it. So hopefully everybody can see it. Connor, can you see my Excel spreadsheet here?
Yeah, we can all see it, Mike.
Lovely. Okay. So this is IBP. And for those that haven't seen it before, it looks eerily like Excel because it is Excel. You can see up here, there's nothing up my sleeve. This is your typical Excel ribbon. All you get is this add-on, which connects you to the cloud, which allows you to see your data in any level that you'd like. I think this is an underrated aspect of it. I mean, Connor, you do a lot of work with our clients. I mean, would you say that it takes people, how long does it take them to adapt to an Excel user interface once they get their hands wet?
It's almost instantaneous. When we begin training sessions with the client and we show them that it's all in Excel, their eyes light up and they're all really happy about it because they know it's going to be a lot easier. And a lot of them really get the kind of foundation understanding of how to navigate and work in it really by the end of the first session even. So it's definitely an amazing feature about it.
Yeah, it's a real useful tool for sure. And having come from prior generations where there was different hieroglyphs and buttons and you had to think like a German to use it, this is very intuitive. So what we're looking at here is the overall demand picture. And what I've done is I have a demo based on guitar parts. I have been playing guitar a lot lately and taking lessons again. That's one of my 2021 New Year's resolutions. And so, so you all get to benefit by watching me do a demo on guitar parts. So what we've done is set up different channels. So what we're looking at here is demand. So this is the demand for different guitars through different customer channels. And we said we're going to play with demand as a scenario to begin with. So a couple of things that help with IBP. One is the ability to drill up and down almost seamlessly. And if you look here, I'm at the monthly level. We'll go down to the weeks in a bit. I'm also at the customer product level. But for the sake of this demo, I'm going to actually remove products and just get to the customer level. And for those that are used to pivot tables, you're thinking that's no big deal. But this is all part of the system. So you don't need to extract it and manage it and massage it. It's all part of the system with this handy dandy edit view button. So for example, if I want to change my level, right, and just look at customer description, I can remove product and it will aggregate. I'm going to stick with months for the time being, but I want to just shrink the time horizon to December. So I'm going to do that. Whoops, December 21. I'll go through that. So now I've changed the time horizon. And I think that's good. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to click OK. And what you're seeing now is this window is taking my request, going out to the HANA server that SAP hosts in the cloud and bringing back the results. And you can see right away it's at the customer level. Pretty cool stuff. So for the scenario, again, in the spirit of cooking shows, I've created the first one myself. And then the second one, I'll show you how to create it. So what I've done, so one of the things with scenarios, you can see up here, I have my baseline scenario, and that's going to be sort of your standard data sets. That's going to be your mainline data set. And I created a scenario earlier, and I'll show you how to create one here in a second, to see what would happen if Amazon increased their sales 150% because they were going to run, what's it called? The deal thing, blanking, the gold box deal, right? Let's pretend they're doing that. So that's going to increase our sales. So I'm going to come in here, and I've created one called Amazon Demand. And now you can see I've got two scenarios displayed. Now, the reason I want to show you two is because it brings up a pretty cool feature. Cool being relative, we're not talking about supply chain planning applications, but cool nonetheless, which is the ability to show multiple scenarios side by side. And everybody's made one of those PowerPoints where you're showing option 1, option 2, option 3, or whatever, right? And everybody always picks option 3. But basically what I'm doing is showing how you can do that in the tool, right? So here's my baseline. Let's say this is what we sold last year. This is what we forecast. And my Amazon rep comes in and says, great news, Mike and Connor, you guys are knocking it out of the park. And as a result, we're gonna promote your gold box for guitars, and you're gonna sell 150%. So what I did was, for this time period, from July to January, in my Amazon demand, you can see the demand is 150% for these weeks. Pretty cool, right? Now, how I did that, right? I didn't go in and type it. I didn't go in and enter it. Although all this data exists at the detail level, what I did is I said, all right, well, for this, and I'll do it. Well, I already did it, but I'll do it again just to prove it. I said, okay, August equals my baseline, and you can see up here the formula is updating, multiplied by 1.5. Push enter. You can see it turns green, which means it's been changed. I'm going to drag this across. And you can see now my Amazon demand scenario is at 150%. It's green because it hasn't been saved yet. I'm going to click save here, which pushes that scenario data up to the cloud and asks for a key figure reason code if you want. I don't feel like it today. And so there you go. So now my demand has changed. So now that's at 150% of my baseline demand, which is great. So now what do we do?
Mike,
oh yeah, go ahead.
Pardon me, Mike. But I think it's important to note that this isn't just saving the data on your screen. This is actually pushing it to the cloud. And so any other planners or users within the organization that can view this Amazon demand scenario, they're getting that data updated for them as well. So you guys are all on the same page, which I think is really important to note.
Yeah, and if you look, Connor, it's almost like I knew you were going to say that. Who did I share this one with? Connor Cook. So now, right, I've already I've taken that scenario and shared it with them, and see if I can change it. There you go. So I've shared this with Connor. I can go ahead and share it with whoever, right? And now that helps to limit sort of the visibility to it. So maybe Connor and I are working on Amazon, and you got a bunch of other people working on Guitar Center, or your local corner shop music dealer, right? They don't really care what we're doing, nor should they. They shouldn't clutter up their inbox, but it's important to us, and we're going to work on it. And that's what it's done. So you've got two scenarios here, and so you might be saying to yourself, Mike, I remember that diagram that you had, the one with all the chevrons. I said, well, now how do we interconnect customer demand to supply? And I'm glad you asked that, because that's what I'm going to show you. So what I've done is created all of these tabs along the bottom, right, to show you the impact of what that demand does. So now going back to the question, saying, okay, can we meet this demand, or should we meet this demand? I mean, a lot of the times you'll get into incidents where, marketing comes in with a great promotion, but if you can't service it, say they're giving away a discount to increase volume, but if you can't meet it as a supply chain, if you're already tapped out and you're going to be tapped out again, really all you're doing is ending up giving away margin, right? And nobody wants that. So now we're going to see if we can support it. So the first thing we'll do, let's go to capacity. That to me is the most interesting. And I'm running the webinar, so that's what we're going to do. So what I've done in these scenarios here is I've mapped, I'm going to scroll over here to the time period and back half of the year. You can see, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little better. So now I'm in weekly view, right? I was in monthly, now I'm in weekly. You can see I have 3 different plants and I've got my scenarios. I have the exact same capacity in them. And what have I done? So what I've done is set up a optimizer problem. And in my optimizer problem, I have 3 different plants with different production costs. 1010 is the cheapest, 1310 is the middle, and 1710 is the most expensive plant to make things. So what does an optimizer do? It minimizes costs and it pushes things to the cheaper plants. And it uses that surge capacity if it has to. And what did that actually end up doing? Well, if you look, right, especially out here, it's utilizing as much as it can in that increased demand scenario. Whoops, let me get back out in this horizon. Right, the back half of the year, it's using as much as it can in that cheapest plant, and then it's maxing out the second cheapest plant. And so here's the impact, right? What it's doing is it's saying, all right, now here's the increase in demand, and it's all going to the more expensive plant. Now you might think it's just adding incremental production, and you might be right, but you might not be right because it's an optimizer. It's actually doing a blue sky solution every single time. So this is one of the big differences in sort of the supply algorithms when we run the scenarios. It's human nature to think linearly. So if you're saying, well, what am I going to do? I increase that demand for my Amazon products 150%. I'm going to take that extra demand and put it where I have capacity. Done. That's not how the system works. The system is actually going to go back through and say, well, it starts with a clean sheet of paper on every solve. So it's not just shoving the extra demand into the extra plan. It's actually replanning those costs. Let's go and see what that does. So let's go ahead and see capacity by product and see if this looks any better. So now I'm showing you, I'm going to kind of move this over a little bit. What are we actually building? So which products are we building in each scenario? And you can see in some, for example, this acoustic guitar here, it's pretty much the same, but it's not always the same, right? In my Amazon one, it's actually reduced production on some of these. And in others, in this location, which is my cheapest location, remember that was 100% in the baseline, it was also 100% in the simulation, but you can see the production is not the same. It's actually changed quite a bit. So even though it's still making that, and if I highlight it, right, it's still making that amount of products. If I go back into the back half of the year here, it's still making all those products. You can see it's making 20,000 units, and that's 10,000 in each scenario, but it's different, right? So you're making more Stratocasters in my increased demand, even though the capacity produced is the same. Okay, you're making less hollow body electric guitars. So it's actually changing the way your supply chain works in each scenario. So that's how it's changing the production. If I'm going to aggregate that, again, let's go ahead and aggregate this data to show some of the reporting capabilities. I'm going to put in product, I think it's product group. Let's try that. And I want to go back to my monthly view. Let's go back to months and we'll focus on that time period from July to January, which is where I had the increased demand. Let's hope this works. All right, so now you can see I've aggregated it up. Now I'm just at my resource and my product group. So I've aggregated the production and you can see, right, here's a dramatic difference. Acoustic guitars get shifted to my 1010 location. So what does a supply chain nerd like me think? I hope we have components to support that, because over the 6 months, for example, and let me show you this fun little trick. I'm going to do totals as well. So I'm going to do periods and total, and this is going to be second half 2021. So just with those few quick settings right now, what you can see is this. So what have I done, right? So in my increased demand scenario, my acoustic guitars went up, my electric guitars went down, and my hollow bodies went down. So basically it's leveraging a lot more of the acoustic production. In my expensive production facility, you can see it's increased the electric guitars as well as decreased the acoustic, which makes sense because we saw it move. So your whole supply chain is moving. The whole point, remember that diagram, right? It's not just linearly plugging in production, it's actually replanning your supply chain and giving you the least cost impact. And now everybody can see it, right? So you can see, well, what am I making? All right, well, that's all well and good, but how many components do I need? Can I, whoops, this is probably too small for you guys, right? So if I'm running my Chicago plant, you know, what do I need from my unfinished products? What do I need from my vendors in order to support it? Okay, so these are my raw material, my intermediate materials. Now I'm going to go back to my suppliers and say, can you support it? So now we've got a different lens. We were looking at capacity. Zoom in, and now we're looking at components. So if I'm buying all these components, right, in my Chicago plant, we said we were making more acoustic guitars in that time frame. Now you can go to your vendors and say, can you support it, right? So wherever my increased production was, or my, you know, whatever products I need to support it, can you meet it? So for example, here's a great one, right? Oops, darn it. And again, I'm just kind of scanning through this. But here's a good example, right? In these weeks here, I'm almost doubling my demand for classical guitar bodies. I should probably go ask my supplier if they can support it, right? Same thing on transportation. What are we doing for transportation? So that's, now I'm going to vendor. Now I'm moving it into a different chevron in that little diagram I showed you and explaining, well, can we meet it from a shipping point of view? Are we shipping on lanes we haven't shipped before? So if we just look at the Boston distribution center, and I'm going to go back to our time period here. And let's go ahead and aggregate it up just because it's easier to see. Again, I also like showing the aggregation capabilities. We'll go to my month view and we'll go for those 6 months again. We'll go from June to January, and we'll do periods in total. No, I think they should just default to total. I think everybody has only ever called it total the entire year. All right, so now we're looking at, right, where am I shipping from Chicago to Boston? Well, my shipping went down. This, however, doubled. So in the 6 months, right, from my San Jose plant, which is now a cross-country shipment to my Boston, DC, my transportation requirements have doubled. Let me zoom in so you guys can see that. Oops, that's scroll. Let me zoom in. There you go. All right, so now we've got transportation receipts doubling in those 6 months. Well, let's go see if we can support that, right? These are the lenses that you need to use to analyze your supply chain because everybody's concerned with a different element of it. We've looked through capacity, that could be labor, it could be machine. We just kind of blended it together. We've looked at products, we've looked at vendor requirements. Can my vendors support it? And we've looked at transportation. Do we have it to, can we even ship it? Are there shipping lanes or shipping volumes that we can't support? So those are all operational terms, and those are all great to show you the impact of what you're asking it to do. However, there's more to it, right? And wait, there's more. So then the more part is the financial impact, which is really what matters. Again, not to hit on Connor's brilliance again, but that comment of not just can we do it, but should we do it? So all these questions I've been answering for you up until this point are can we do it questions. Is it feasible? Can we smush it in there? Whether that's a vendor requirement, a capacity requirement, or transportation. You're all asking about can we do this? Now let's move into should we do this, which is my favorite part. So this is some quick, what I call spend key figures. And all we've done here, and I'll zoom in again, is taken those production impacts and multiplied it by the spend key figures that I've modeled in the system. So now you're saying, well, how much production cost do we have? Okay, well, it went up, right? Of course it went up, we produced more. What's our overhead spend for each scenario? How much raw materials are we purchasing? What's our transportation cost, right? These are the same, but a lot of them are different. So can we support it financially, right? What is the spend projections going to be? Do we have a budget to cover it? And then finally, one that I broadly call finance, showing my financial ignorance, you're looking at, well, what does that even do? Is that even worth it, right? And these are kind of, garbage numbers, but what you're looking at is profitability. And what you're seeing is it's actually less profitable because we're using more expensive production elements. So we're making more, we're shipping more, but it's not as profitable. In fact, profits are going down because of the increased costs, whether that's overtime, whether that's cross-country shipping, which we saw, right? So now you're saying, man, yeah, we can fit it, but should we fit it? Right? And now you get down to a gut check of do you believe these or not? Again, this is kind of a not semi-realistic scenario showing that it's not just can we do it, but it's all those lenses that people are viewing your supply chain through. It's showing, is it something that you want to build? Is it something that you want to ship? Is it something that you want to purchase from a vendor? Can you even meet it? All those lenses, including the financial bottom line, appear in a side-by-side scenario. You can create A, B, C, and D and see what that does. So that's a pretty in-depth look through all those chevrons. Again, hopefully it shows you some of the capability of scenarios in modeling different outcomes. Now, what I'm going to show you next, again, use your questions in your hands if you have any questions. What I'm going to show you next is how to actually create one of these things, because it's actually pretty easy. So I'm going to go back into my capacity here. And let's build upon my Amazon one. I'll build upon the baseline one. So I'm going to take this out real quick. I'm going to create one. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase capacity in that time frame on my cheapest resource. So we're going to say, well, that's not going to work. Now I'm going to do a third shift on the cheap resource, and hopefully that'll increase our profitability. So now instead of 10,000, let's do 15,000. And again, this is sort of a placeholder. You can model hours or units or seconds or whatever you want, but I'm just doing units right now. So I'm going to make this one be 15,000 a week instead of 10,000 a week because we're adding a third shift. And I mentioned we're going to show you how to create that scenario. Really, it's not that hard, although it's more impressive in what it does and how to create it. All I do is create this scenario button. I'm going to say plant 1010, third shift. Put in a quick description, share it with Connor, and click OK. And that's it. Now what it's doing is it's creating a parallel solve in that cloud, copying all the data underneath it. All the master data, all the demand, all the transportation, all the production rates, everything. All it's changed is this capacity supply. But otherwise, it's copying every little thing under the sun to make it a replica of my Amazon one. And you can see the scenario here changed. So now I have third shift. If I scroll over, you can see I've got my 15,000. Okay. I'm going to click run. And we'll do a constrained optimizer. I'm going to pick my third shift and run that. While that's running, I'll queue it up so we can see a side-by-side comparison. So again, clicking in here, I can compare it to my Amazon one. So now I've got two different scenarios in a single version. And I'm going to click OK. One thing to note too, I've been showing a lot of aggregation on data types. I've shown product aggregation to family. I've shown time-based aggregation to months. What I haven't shown much of it is currency conversions and unit of measure conversions, but that's also feasible. If you come in here, at any of the aggregates that I was showing, if you go to key figure view, you can actually see there's a target currency. You can pick anything really, as long as you have the currency values. And you can pick target unit of measure, which is again, whatever you want to use to support your unit of measures. And those all aggregate up through whatever view you're looking at. Let's see if my job finished yet. Still running. See, that's why I did the cooking show one first, so we had something to look at. One thing I like to show as well on this demand are, now these should hold the same, right? It should be the same revenue. And if we looked at total customer receipts, you can see they do end up being the same. I'm gonna bring in that baseline one too, just to show options A, B, and C. All right, you can bring in up to, I don't know how many you can go, quite a bit. Right, and it's meeting all of the demand in all the scenarios. So it's no longer a revenue question. You're gonna make the same revenue. You're gonna have the same service. It's just at what cost are you gonna meet that service level expectation? Because you're making your supply chain jump through hoops to meet it, which I guess is what supply chains do. And it's still running. It should be just a minute. It's usually 2 minutes for my little one here. We also have customers. This is sort of an important one too. You can see which locations are sourcing which customers, which is a master data element that is unique to IBP in the SAP suite, but it really is the master data element that makes all of this work, to be quite honest. Why would you might be saying to yourself, why would you say that? Well, the reason why is because without this connectivity from customer into your, in this case, a distribution center, but it could be a manufacturing site, without that connection, you lose the ability to do the financials. Because customer pricing is going to be at the customer product level, and that's how you get your revenue. So in an integrated scenario, you need customer product level information in order to build the revenue picture. And then you bounce that against the costs, which we have in capacity, vendor production costs, transportation costs, to get you your overall profitability. So without revenue and costs in the same model, it becomes very hard to do the profitability analysis. By having that last leg of connectivity to have customer to distribution center, it gives you the ability to do your financial evaluation. Let's go out here and take a look at what it did. And you can see it maxed it out the whole time. This third shift reduced the production cost on that expensive plant because it used up all that cheap capacity that I had. So if we look, for example, at this week 42, right? In my Amazon one, I had 10,000 units of capacity. My third shift, I have 15,000 units. In my capacity usage, it used every minute of that. And by doing so, reduced the load on my expensive one, right? Just as planned. So now let's go ahead and see what that does from a financial point of view. Do we actually make more money with the third shift? Everybody's on the edge of their seats. So if we look at profitability, right, your third shift is actually still less, even more, because you keep losing money with each optimization run, probably because the labor is more expensive, to be quite honest. So it's just sort of a silly example, but in this case, which should bring a smile to all supply chain planners' faces, adding demand, giving away promotional margin is not worth it, right? You end up making less profit by giving it away to Amazon. So this becomes a question of, is it worth it to us? Is it worth it to be as an organization? Are there intangible benefits, blah, blah, blah. But from a pure supply chain point of view, we're actually losing money by increasing volume, which can happen. And that's something that only this integrated planning tool can give you, because it does that. You're not like extracting it. You're not getting somebody's pricing file that's 6 months old and whatever they've concocted on their laptop, right? This is fully integrated. Remember that slide where everybody's looking around the table? This is all the same plan, right? This production value here is the same production plan that my capacity is looking at. It's the same production quantities that my production capacity is generated. It's the same plan that I'm giving to my vendors to say, well, what can we do with each one? So everybody's looking at the same plan. So here's my vendor purchasing requirements, right? So now you're saying it's the same plan, but everybody's looking at it through the lens that matters to them. And if you think about how that can really get everybody on the same page and align and understanding the impacts of each change, that's a really powerful tool to understand. So that's what we have from an overall point of view. I'll just kind of pause and see if there's any questions there. I do appreciate everybody's attention. Connor, anything that I missed that you wanted to highlight in our planning scenarios or experiences you want to share from your projects?
I think you did a great job, Mike.
That's why I invited you. No, I do. I mean, it's a powerful tool, and I think, you know, if you think about what the world is like without this, you can talk about, you know, different planning algorithms or statistical forecasting or whatever, but having this type of ability to solve problems on the fly, to have it in the meeting like I just did, is incredibly valuable for a supply chain, and have everybody on the same page.
I've had clients in the past, Mike, where I'm kind of showing them this what if functionality with scenarios and versions, and they literally just start breaking out in laughter of joy of how simple it is, and it's going to, you know, eliminate hours, if not days, of work for them. It's a really it's a big win for a lot of planning teams. Yeah,
definitely. Cool. So while everybody's thinking of questions, again, which I'm sure they're all typing furiously, just to go back to our scenarios here in our PowerPoints, right? These, let me go back here real quick, right? This is the slide I was talking about. Everybody's now on the same page, whether you're looking at vendor purchasing requirements or labor capacity or shipments or profitability. Everybody's now looking at that single version, right? That single element of truth. By having an interconnected customer, distribution center, inventory plan, manufacturing capacity, vendor requirements, all on the same, and being able to copy that in real time and solve it real time becomes incredibly powerful. And that to me is the most crucial requirement to any supply chain plan right now, because when these type of scenarios occur every week, it seems like, you need a tool that can stand up to those sort of challenges in terms of timing and efficiency. So I want to thank everybody for joining. One real quick plug for SCM Connections here. We're doing a supply chain makeover for supply chains that have been impacted by COVID, or really any supply chain over the past year or so. It's a free, we're giving away all the services for free for whoever has the best supply chain makeover story. We'll be implementing the SNLP module, giving you these scenario and financial planning elements. You'll have to pay SAP for the license, but all the services and implementation, training, testing are all complimentary working with SCM Connections. Go to scmconnections.com/supply chain makeover. That's on our LinkedIn page, our website. Check it out, because it's a pretty cool promotion we're running, and it has the chance to really give you these kind of capabilities that we're looking at today. If you want to just reach out to us individually, here's our good looking faces here. My name is Mike. This is Connor with me. You can see our emails and LinkedIn profiles and phone numbers. Go ahead and reach out to us if you have any questions beyond this. We do have one question. Actually, who had their hand up? Oh shoot, I think, oh, Christine had her hand up. Did you have a question in the chat? Let's see. See if I can unmute her. There you go,
Yes,
Christine. Yep, you're unmuted.
Yes, my question was about the overhead cost, because in the different value to be maintained, so that to get those results, you have shown us the kind of direct cost, but you, in one of the results, you also shown production overhead spent. So what are the master data to be maintained to get those costs?
Yeah. Good question. So this can be as detailed or as high level as you'd like. We had one client that went down to measuring each utility. Then they had like anything manufactured at that plant had a facility overhead, like utilities cost. And then they had an allocation to each individual production line, which is rolled up. Really, it's however the organization accounts for that overhead cost. If you can bring it into IBP, it's just a way to multiply it by where it's manufactured, whether that's line level or whether you're doing it facility level or whether you spread it out across everything in the organization. As long as that data is available and aligns to the accounting that you'd like, it's available to input into IBP and multiply on the production quantities to get the projected spend. Sometimes people integrate it, and sometimes they just update it once a quarter, once a year, something like that. Cool. Appreciate the question. Any other questions? Oh, looks like you have another. Whoops. Do you have another question, Christine, or did that answer it?
Yes, another question.
Oh, go for it.
It's about the fixation. I've seen that it was possible to validate some aggregated level to do some fixation to avoid when you change one number to change some levels that had been validated before. So is it to avoid? Is it does it work? Is it for performance? Is it good to use fixation?
So it uses, in this case, what I've set it up to do is to do a proportion based on the existing values. So if I set, for example, this one to 20,000, oops, that's 2,000. If I set it to 20,000, it's going to proportionally disaggregate that value to all of the products at Amazon in the same existing proportions. So I forget what it was before, 18,333. It's going to take the 20,000 and proportionately spread it out. You can have other key figures that are copied that make everything 20,000, and those are different settings that you decide on in the technical design. Cool. All right. I think that's it. We'll be sending this out. I really do appreciate everybody spending their time. I know there's a lot of webinars out there, and we do appreciate everybody's attendance, interest, and focus. We'll be sending this out and posting it on YouTube. Check out our YouTube channel as well. We've got a lot of other webinars out there, some other educational material. And like I said, feel free to reach out to Connor and I with any further questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to you in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for attending, everybody.